sure. Let's think. We're all here together, as usual, listening, thinking, analyzing these teachings so that we can use these as tools, so we can become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes. Always, as His Holiness says, bodhisattvas think in terms of eons. So we're thinking in terms of eons. So we're thinking, we're going to listen to these teachings, and so we can become enlightened, and we can benefit sentient beings. And we're going to make a mandala offering, make an offering of all the contents of the universe, all the delicious things that make people happy. We're going to pile them all up and make an offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. And we're going to then request the teachings. Yeah.
The mandala: this ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Muru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigatory beings enjoy this pure land. Perfect, pure, holy gurus from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dharmakaya. Please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dharma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need.
And imagine the Buddha very happily receives our offering when we say this little mantra.
Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nirayatami.
And Jeff and everybody very kindly made all the offerings of and representations of body, speech, and mind of enlightened beings. So here's our little motivation, like I said before. Say it in English. We'll say it in English one time. So we think until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the spiritual community. And then by the virtuous karma we create from listening to this Dharma, may we become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes, to be of benefit to sentient beings, thinking like that. Sangye chodan soke chodam la janchu baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye druppa shog sangye chodan soke chodam la janchu baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye druppa shog. That's it, people. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, darlings. Thank you, Tara. All right, sweethearts. So here we've discussing putting it in framework. It's always good to, oh, I'll just cut you out. No, I haven't. It's always so important to look at the big picture. What's the big picture here? The big picture is this lam rim, this amazing packaging of Buddhist teachings coming from Atisha in the 11th century, and then, based on Tsongkhapa's interpretation of this. And basically it's taking all the main points, the essential points of the entire body of knowledge of this amazing tradition, going right back to the Buddha over the centuries, through India, through Tibet, these marvelous knowledge holders expressing all these teachings in this orderly way, orderly according to the psychological capacity of the disciple. Like I always point out, just like any body of knowledge we learn, we know this, we understand this so intimately. It's just that we're not used to spiritual teachings thinking in this way. We think of spiritual as kind of hippie, trippy, and cross your fingers and hope for the best. No, not like that. We're trying to find reality. We're trying to understand reality. We're trying to see reality. We're trying to see how things exist. Why? Because Buddha says we're living in La La Land right now, and that's why we suffer. So one way of looking at what the Lam Rim is, the presentation of all these Buddhist teachings, is simply his presentation from his own observation, and indeed the observation of all the yogis since then, who've always also seen reality, that this is how things exist. And our living in the degree to which the delusions in our mind prevent us from seeing how things exist is the degree to which we suffer. This is what Buddha's saying. It's kind of initially quite of a surprise to us to think that we suffer because we have misconceptions in the mind. But this is exactly what Buddha's saying. Once we understand this, the path makes sense, The path makes sense. So the very first level of the teachings from the point of view of the Lam Rim, this packaging, is the essence of it. The essence of it is abiding by the laws of karma. According to the Buddha, everything, the trillions of sentient beings, mind possessors, whose minds are beginningless and endless, and whose every moment, whose every action of body, speech, and mind necessarily programs that mind and produces its future experiences. We are our own creators, very simply, is what the Dalai Lama puts. It's quite shocking. There's no creator out there who made the universe, not for the Buddha. That's a misconception. We create ourselves. This is the shocking thing that Buddha's making, the shocking point. Once we get this, and that's the essence, the fundamentals, the starting point in the first level, the first scope, the ground, junior school entry 1, grade 1, is to learn to develop good ethics. And why should we do that? because the actions we do right now, you know, jumping on wrong partners and eating too much food and killing and lying and stealing, all the rubbish nonsense we do with our body and speech is driven, those actions are driven by all the neurotic states of mind, which causes suffering, future suffering. So the emphasis in the first stage is nothing to do with compassion yet. Nothing to do with compassion. Nothing to do with compassion. That's university. So junior school is, Buddha says, honey child, you don't want future suffering, more sweetie pie, precious, petal, don't cause it. So stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing. That's his advice, the doctor's advice, you know, because that is what programs your mind with rubbish, which then produces your future rubbish. And who wants rubbish? We're sick of suffering. That's the first level of practice. Abide by the laws of karma, and then live in vows and purify. They're the essential tools we use. Now we've gone to high school. Now we've gone to the subtle level beyond the body and speech. Now we get to the root of the problem, which is in the next level, which we're discussing here, the delusions that drive the body and speech. We've got to now get rid of them. So here we're presenting, we've already done that in, you know, in the Discovering Buddhism, in the very first module, we looked at the mind. So it's usually here, if you're studying the Lamrim properly and studying it typically for the Tibetans, because they, you know, they don't need introducing about what the mind is in the beginning. We do, because we've got a different model. So here you really learn to understand the mind more deeply, understand the delusions and distinguish the delusions from the virtues. This is the job of being the Buddhist. When you get to high school, this middle scope, this is where you become a Buddhist. Good ethics is common to anybody, but this is the unique approach of the Buddha, based on his understanding of the mind, based on his crucial point that there are delusions and there are virtues in the mind, and delusions are adventitious, delusions not belong, delusions are not at the core of our being. And because they're misconceptions, they can be eradicated from the mind. So here in this second scope, if we graduated at the second scope, if we graduated here, the wisdom wing, we've worked on the Hinayana path. This is all the teaching shared by the practitioners of the Hinayana path. If we graduated here, we would not only just control first the body and speech, now control the mind and get some renunciation, give up attachment, but we would also get shamatha and realize emptiness and get the hell out of samsara. But here we're on the Mahayana path, so shamatha and concentrate, and shamatha and wisdom are the last two of the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva, the final stages of the bodhisattva path, which we will discuss in the future, in the next modules. Here, the main emphasis is to give up suffering and its causes. To give up suffering and its causes. Renunciation is the essence of the realization here. Abiding by the laws of karma and giving up the grossest level of suffering is the essence of the first scope. Now it's the essence of it, is to get to the root of the problem, the delusions. Which means you have to understand attachment and then anger and all the other dramas, you know. So Venerable Fedor in his course notes goes through that here. And we've also got the 12 links, which we haven't even looked at yet. Bit of rush. Only got this last day today, but if you study Venerable Fedor's course notes, you'll get a good understanding. I'm just touching on the surface, you know. So let's look at the course notes and see what he says. Where are they? I have to find it, of course. Zurich, a little thing called Zurich. Final docs, module 9. Oh, no, that's not it. Tara sent me the things this morning. The points of what have I done with them?
Yeah, module 9.
I understand, darling.
Yeah.
Won't go. Where is it? Books 2 to 3. Okay. Desktop. I'll save them there. Oh, I've already got them there. Okay. So let's look. Okay. Here we go. So, oh, this is no good. What's all this? Oh, wait a minute. I see. Okay, so that's all the points from last time. Thank you, Tara. Very good. All right, good. Okay, so now let's look at the course notes themselves. Venerable Fedor's. He's a resident teacher at our German center these days, I think. Zurich. Final docs. Tablet practice. Samsara Nirvana. Okay, so now let's look at what we can discuss now. I think it's going to be the different states of mind. We'll go into a little bit you know, when I talk about the different states of mind, I very rarely go beyond attachment, anger, jealousy. And if, you know, we don't even go much detail. Mainly if we understand attachment and anger, the others make a lot more sense, you know, but this is a much more detail coming from a text called Lorig, Mind and Awareness, where you study first the epistemological model of the mind, which I don't think he goes into at all here. We can talk a bit about that. And then there's the psychological model of the mind, which is the contents of the mind, the delusions and the virtues. And the key job, as I said, is to distinguish between the delusions and the virtues. And then why would you want to do that? Because the delusions cause you suffering and the virtues cause you happiness. And we're trying to get rid of suffering, aren't we? That's the point here. So here we are. He's got all his masses of outline here, chapter 2. Here he says, you know, he's going in the outline, he's following the Lam Rimba Tsongkhapa. Excuse me, swearing, sniffing. And then he's got contemplating the way one is being kept in samsara. That is the truth of the cause and the way the afflictions are generated. Let's look at a bit of that. Let's just try and see what he says. The way the afflictions are generated. The way the afflictions are. Let's have a look. Here we go. Next. Right. Okay. Chapter 4. So last week we looked a little bit at all the kind of the different packagings of sufferings, which he goes into detail. He talks about the 6, the 8, and the 3 different levels of suffering. We touched on those briefly last week, remember? So now, as he says, we mentioned in the beginning, when we try to generate the true enunciation, the first we meditate on suffering, and then secondly we meditate on the cause of suffering. This is the point we've reached now. So this is the obvious point, isn't it? It's the same with ordinary daily life. If you know, your lungs are in a terrible state, you've got to first understand the suffering of your lungs and understand what's going on and what it is and the diagnosis. And it's called, you know, and then you look at the causes, and that's called smoking cigarettes. So you want to give up both the suffering and the causes, don't you? It's pretty obvious. And this is the interesting point with the Four Noble Truths. The first one is there is suffering. And the second is there are causes. The third is you can be rid of them. And the fourth is how to do it. But that's like any problem in daily life. If you've got a problem, any problem, you first got to identify the problem precisely. You've got to identify it precisely. Then you have to identify the causes. It's pretty obvious. Then you have the solution. Already that's implied. The causes of the problem imply the solution. So here, of course, we've got Buddha's analysis. There is suffering, and there's different kinds of suffering, remember? First kind of suffering is the suffering of suffering, which we discussed in the first scope when we talked about karma, past actions, past deluded actions, and past delusions that then ripen as our present suffering, and the actions now that will ripen as our future suffering, the suffering of suffering, either the lower realms or indeed in this human life, the bad things that happen. And now we know we don't want those, so then we want to give them up. We have to find the causes. Well, the causes are 1, past negative actions, and 2, the delusions that underpin those negative actions. So here we're dealing with the deluded component. In the first scope, you're mainly dealing with the actions, just don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Here, we're looking at the delusions that underpin those actions. This is more subtle, isn't it? First, you control the servants of the mind. Now we control the mind. So we looked at a bit, you know, that he presented the 6 kind of sufferings, the 8 kind of sufferings, and the 3 kinds of sufferings. And we don't like when it's sort of, he's like rubbing our nose in it, but that's, you've got to understand those sufferings. And then we've got to realize as Buddhists, and we take them for granted. Well, of course, getting old is natural and having bad things happen is natural, but Buddha's telling us there are causes of it. And guess what, honey child, you can stop them. That's pretty exciting to think you can stop them. That's the analysis, you know. So we went through all that. We touched on it a bit. So now we get to the, see here, as he says, the truth of origin. I mean, I don't like the word origin. They say it's correct in Tibetan, but the word cause is much better. I just like the word cause, you know. The cause of suffering. There are 2 kinds. Basically, we have the mental sufferings and the delusions, and we have karma. So we've dealt with the karmic one. This is in other modules. Now we're dealing with the mind, the definition of a mental affliction. That's the term they use in Buddhist psychology, okay? The word affliction. I mean, we don't use that in modern life. That's why an interesting Lama Yeshe just never used it. The other word that's commonly used to refer to affliction is the word delusion. And what that indicates, that word delusion indicates the character of the so-called mental afflictions. Affliction is a good word. Some problem is a problem, an affliction is a problem. It's a term they use from Sanskrit and Pali and Tibetan. But what kind of affliction? A mental affliction. That's why I think the term mental illness is a brilliant precise translation of Buddha's word affliction. Think about it. Our problem is when we hear mental illness, we just hear the extreme ones. And there's a group of people way over there. I'm not mentally ill, I'm normal. Then there are the wackos, you know, that's how we think. Well, Buddha's got a much more subtle, nuanced view. Quite literally, he is telling us, if you are in samsara, you are mentally ill, honey child. And those mental illnesses, the three root mental illnesses are called ignorance, and then attachment, and then aversion. They're the three root mental illnesses. I love that term. And if you think of it, analyze it carefully, it is absolutely accurate. A mental illness. And it's very humbling because we've got this view that I'm normal and the wacko over there is crazy, you know. That's why we're so ashamed to think we have a mental illness. Buddha says, don't be worried. We're all the same. We're all in the same boat. His view is much more radical of what mental illness is. Please hear these words very clearly, you know. Don't have your own definition of it, like a paranoid person or a psychopath and that kind of words we use. We're all mentally ill. It's a question of degree, that's all. So it's a great term, I think. I'm going to be using that term here instead of affliction, all right? So these mental afflictions, these mental illnesses, these delusions, and the delusion is the brilliant, we've talked this all the time. Delusion tells you the character of these mental illnesses. They are misconceptions that mislead you, that misrepresent the world to you. As they say in Buddhist psychology, you know, the extent to which your mind is caught up, let's say, in attachment or anger, for example, the two main mental illnesses in daily life, the extent to which your mind is caught up in them, as Lama Zopa puts it, is the extent to which the world out there appears back to you wrongly. This is the way these mental illnesses function. When we get this, we really understand what Buddha's talking about, you know. So he's got these traditional presentations, okay? This is page 75, the 6 root delusions. So I don't know why they put anger first, but maybe because it's the most harmful. And he defines each one, you know? So for example, anger is the harmful intent that wants to harm or destroy its object, isn't it? It could be anything, couldn't it, when you're angry? Attachment, the next one, is a desire for an inner or outer object after having mentally elaborated that object as being very beautiful and desirable. In other words, it's a thought. Attachment is a thought that over-exaggerates the deliciousness of the object. That's my definition. And attachment comes first. Here, anger is put first, I think, because it's the most harmful. But attachment is the main voice of the root delusion. If you put the category of 3 main afflictions, then ego grasping or ignorance, he's going to talk about this, is the root. On the basis of this, you have attachment to get, and attachment. And then you have aversion when attachment doesn't get what it wants. That's the 3. He's looking here traditionally at the 6. So anger. So as he says here, quite often in the West, we sometimes confuse being a very strong character, a very forceful character with anger. That's not the case. Anger is specifically a type of emotion, a mental state that wishes to harm. You know, we can see that. Look at the world. I mean, look at the world, people. So attachment, you know, he's using this word desire and attachment interchangeably as synonyms. This is the thing. Attachment, craving, desire. In Buddhist psychology, they're all synonyms. So clearly in our culture, we use these words in a very different way. So when you hear the way Buddha describes, we're describing specifically a neurotic state of mind. You know, a neurotic. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just hear the way Buddha's saying it's an exaggeration of the deliciousness of something. And of course, as far as Buddha is concerned in the Four Noble Truths, as Lama Zopa says, it's the main cause of samsara. It's the main cause of suffering. It's so primordially deep inside us. And we discuss this in depth all the time, you know. Then you've got pride. So this is very interesting. This is a fascinating one, let me tell you. This is a group called the 6 root mental illnesses. So pride, I don't think any of us like to admit to pride. It feels too heavy somehow. But listen to this. This is not what he's saying here. This is me. But we all definitely admit to low self-esteem. We feel very fragile. We feel very sad. We feel we are not worthy. We're not good enough. We're not enough, you know, and we kind of feel like we feel sorry for ourselves for having low self-esteem. We feel definitely compassion for someone who's got low self-esteem. But who has compassion for someone with pride? Nobody. But listen to this, folks, and this is very uncomfortable. Low self-esteem, pride is an okay, what's he say here? Pride is, so how is what Fedor's saying, is considered a state of mind where one focuses on one's attainments, on one's qualities. In other words, you over-exaggerate your good qualities. The nature of all the delusions is they're very obsessive, you know? They're not rational. They're over-exaggerating. That's what they do. And they're kind of fragile. So pride is or arrogance, over-exaggerate your good qualities, your importance. Now, we would not like to think we have that, but you listen to this. The flip side of that is the over-exaggeration of your bad qualities. And that's low self-esteem. And you know what? If you didn't have pride, you could not have low self-esteem. In other words, there I am with my pride, and these delusions are ever so subtle, you know, they're not sort of necessarily gross and overt. So we've all got some aspect of this one. We over-exaggerate. And I think in the West, this is probably one of our main delusions. All of us, but listen to this. We have an assumption that we want to be more important. You see, when we look at attachment, these are very linked together. Attachment, one of its consequences of practicing attachment for so long, and that means coming into this life from having practiced attachment in the past, the consequence of that is dissatisfaction. I don't have enough. So it could be food, it could be sex, it could be money. These are the obvious external objects. But when it's more subtle and more pervasive in us, we feel I am not enough. I am not enough. So that sounds very similar to low self-esteem, doesn't it? I'm not good enough, you know? So they're so linked, all these different delusions. But the thing is, low self-esteem is deflated pride. So a proud person, an arrogant person, think about it, a very arrogant person, you know, because the delusions are never comfortable. They're not happy. They're not comfortable. An arrogant person who's over-exaggerating their own importance also wants people to be seeing them that way. You present yourself this way. And as soon as, okay, forget about other people, but as soon as you meet up, when you've got arrogance, as soon as you meet a person who seems to be better than you at whatever it is that you think you're proud about, then you know what happens? You become deflated. Oh, they're better than me. I'm no good. Now, if we live mostly in they're all better than me, I'm not good enough, guess why we think that? Because we have pride. But we live mostly in the deflated level of it. So then it's almost like with pride, with low self-esteem, when you meet a person who's better, or you're constantly looking at the world out there, threatened by other people being better than you, then you get low self-esteem. Really, low self-esteem is saying, how dare they be better than me? We kind of take it as a personal insult. We don't like to think of it like this. And this is the suffering we have in enormous abundance in our culture. It's because we've got pride, you know, this over-exaggeration, this kind of sense of sort of we are important, especially as a culture. I mean, if you're in part of the world where you're in the group that's considered to be the higher one, you know, with privileges and good situations and good jobs and good food, naturally one identifies with that group and you become arrogant. There's no question. If you are in that group, but you're part of the lower group, it could be race, it could be gender. Look how it turns in on itself. You're part of a group that you think you're in the right group, and then suddenly you're the female instead of the male. So naturally you feel all offended and insulted because now I'm nobody. I'm in the lower part of the group. Or whatever it is we identify with. We do this all the time. We categorize, you know, whether it's gender, race, money, you know, class, position. It's constant. And that's rooted in pride. And then it flips over as low self-esteem. It's very fascinating. It's hard to see it. We would never think we're proud. Now put it this way. If we have arrogance, we're going to get low self-esteem if we meet someone who's better, because we're always seeing everybody out there as threatening to us, you know. We're scared to meet people who are better because it's like personally insulting. But if we didn't have arrogance, we'd be humble. And you know what? If you're humble, you are content. You've got self-confidence. This is surprising, you know, because all the delusions have this kind of sharp edge to them. They're not happy. A virtue is called self-confidence, and you would have that if you were humble. Meaning, if you're humble, you are content with who you are, and you're delighted to meet a person who's better than you, and you would praise them because you're not feeling threatened. That means you'd have self-confidence and you'd be humble. Arrogance comes along with low self-esteem, and humility comes along with self-confidence. If you analyze these, it's really evident if we look at ourselves carefully. The key thing to understand is the character of all the delusions, the afflictions, the mental illnesses. They're voices of the root delusion, the assumption of an I, a separate I. They're all the voices of that I, and they've got these different character. So attachment is all hungry and needy. Aversion is kind of angry and pointing fault. Arrogance is kind of overinflated. Low self-esteem is underinflated. You know, they've all got this. Jealous is actually, interestingly, is rooted in anger. Like, how dare that person be happy? You know, you're jealous of their good fortune, jealous of their happiness. So they've all got this, they're all rooted in the root delusion. It's very fascinating. So the more we understand these delusions in the most basic way, as Venerable Fedor was talking here, I'm giving a bit more flavor to them here by talking. But if you look at the bare bones, know that a delusion by definition is an over-exaggeration. Know that it's rooted in being a conception. They're all rooted in the root delusion of an assumption of an I in the first place. That's why if you realize emptiness, all the other ones just crumble into dust. There's no basis anymore for proud, jealous, low self-esteem, doubt, all the rest, you know. They're all voices of this assumption of an I. That's why if you realize emptiness, they all collapse. There's no basis anymore. So it's a really fascinating kind of model. It's not how we think in the West at all, not at all. So pride is very fascinating. And pride is going to be one of the worst ones because it's ever so subtle in us and we would never admit to it. And this is one of the worst obstacles to learning anything, because you think you know everything, you know. You don't listen. It blinds you. It makes you deaf. You can't hear the teachings. If you have arrogance, if you have pride, you know, you can't hear the teachings. It's very fascinating. Ignorance here in this group of 6, he talks about ignorance, but he's not discussing the root ignorance. This is in general, just simply being ignorant of how things exist, you know. It's like it's being very confused, not being very clear, not understanding cause and effect, all that kind of thing. Ignorance in general is kind of a very dull state of mind that is not very bright. But also specifically here, not understanding cause and effect, not understanding the Four Noble Truths, is specifically in the Buddhist context, you know. Now, another one is very fascinating. It's called doubt. This is a major problem for some people. So as Fedor says here, it refers specifically to, you know, doubt in general. They talk about how doubt in general is a positive quality, because if you don't know about mathematics yet and someone says, you know, you're just beginning to learn it and you're not quite sure what it means, you sort of, but here the doubt he's describing is a very specific one. It's doubt tending towards the wrong view. So if you're thinking about karma, well, maybe it is, no, it doesn't. You have a doubt about it and you go round in circles, you know. But this is how he talks about that. So that's a really interesting, it's in your process. Okay, how they describe, when you start to learn, you go through these stages, and think about this in terms of any body of knowledge. Like if you say you've never heard of acupuncture, never heard of it, and you hear for the first time in a country that has allopathic system as its model, and suddenly you hear with this weird wacko people who stick needles in you. Of course, you're going to laugh, aren't you? And the first view you have is called wrong view, which is the next one actually. Wrong view. Don't be ridiculous. There can't possibly be acupuncture. That's because we're speaking here on the basis of it actually being true, but you've never heard of it, so you immediately go to wrong view. Now, most of the world lives like that. I mean, wrong view is outrageous, you know. It's just simply, it's like not possible, can't be right, impossible, even if it is true. So if you start to, then you start to think, well, I'm going to learn about it. You open your mind. So the next step is doubt tending towards the wrong view. You start to study it, think about it, ask people, and you start to shake a little bit and you go, well, maybe it's right. No, can't be. That's doubt tending towards the wrong view, but you persevere. You keep reading, you check up more people, and you start to have now doubt tending towards the right view. Well, maybe it does exist, but you're not sure yet. So this doubt is very sensible. It's very intelligent. You need to have that. Instead of arrogantly thinking you're right, even if you're wrong, which is our big problem. You've got to have a very humble mind. So then eventually you keep looking, you keep checking, and guess what? You'll eventually get to the next state of mind. They call it correct belief, based on your study and your analysis. And eventually you'll get the direct experience of acupuncture. That's inferential knowledge. And at that point, you have such an understanding of the theories, you can even pass an exam. You understand? And then finally, you get the direct experience of acupuncture by doing it. Every body of knowledge is like that. We go through this process, you know. So these are all the afflictions, the problems, the mental illnesses that prevent us. They talk here particularly that prevent us from learning, you know. So doubt is a serious one. And many people in their own lives, you just live in doubt the whole time. Maybe this is right, or maybe that's right. You know, if you've got too many Libras in your chart, you know, maybe this is right. No, maybe that's right. You can never work it out. So the only way to conquer doubt is using logic and clearly breaking down your doubt by using wisdom to argue with it. It's got to be a very conscious process. You know, otherwise living in doubt, you go crazy. You're never sure if you're doing the right thing, never sure if something is right. You've got to engage in thinking to get to the point. So doubt is good, but you can't just live in it. You've got to persevere, breaking it down, you know. So the next one, they call it wrong view. So they have all these terms, you know. The 5 delusions we've just described, you know, for example, anger, attachment, pride, ignorance, and doubt, are called, he says they're called, you can read about it. I'll just go through briefly what he's saying. I've never talked like, I've never discussed all this, never even discussed it with any of our teachings. When you go into more detail with low reg, you will learn all this, okay? So these are 4, they are called the 5 non-view afflictions. So meaning they're more like emotional afflictions. Now we've got this category called wrong view. There are 5 of them. And these are called views, wrong views. So the first one's called the view of the transitory collection. So this might get a bit kind of complicated. Let me explain. Okay. It's a type of ignorance, and it's specifically the ignorance that believes in an intrinsic me. In general, do I want to go into all this? I'll have to decide. I don't want to go into all this. I want you to read it and study it yourself. All right? I'm all right. I'll go into it a bit then. Okay. So the view of the transitory collection, which sounds like hilarious. It sounds really, let's use the Tibetan, jigta. It's a lot easier, jigta. Okay. In general, when you talk about the 3 poisons, you talk about the root delusion being ignorance, ma rigpa, and it's the root delusion that sees everything as intrinsic. That's a very broad way of talking. Now we're getting more specific here. So here, the actual cause, the main delusion that causes you to stay in samsara is a specific type of wrong view called the view of the transitory collection. The transitory collection refers to all your aggregates, the bits and pieces that make you up. So the view of, of this transitory, so the view of the transitory collection is the grasping at the inherent existent I and mine, on the basis of focusing on the aggregates. Ignorance, marigpa, in general, is the root delusion that believes that everything has an intrinsic nature. The view of the transitory collection is a type of ignorance that specifically grasps at the I as being inherent. That's all. It's specific to the I. Ignorance, marigpa, in general, is everything has an intrinsic nature. This is a specific one that grasps at the I on the basis of the aggregates. That's the view of the transitory collection. Jigta is much nicer in Tibetan. The next wrong view is they call it extreme view. So this is the one, when you start to study emptiness and dependent arising, we'll go into this. The Buddha talks about the two truths. There's conventional truth, the reality of how things exist conventionally, and then there's a reality of how things exist ultimately. And this is the king of logics, as Lama Yeshe puts it, to prove emptiness. Well, at the moment, we live in the two extreme views. So when we hear emptiness, which is the name given to how things exist ultimately, we hear it as nihilism. There's nothing. That's one extreme view. Then when we hear dependent arising, that things do exist interdependently, we wrongly hear it as eternalism, permanent, set in stone. And that's the other extreme view. So we're like two drunken sailors running between, there is either something that does exist eternalistically, and then we hear there's nothing existing, and it's nihilism. We fall into the abyss of the great mistake. These are the two extreme views. So thinking about dependent arising and emptiness is the way you conquer these two extreme views. Then the next one is the view holding views as supreme. That means on top of other wrong views, such as the view of the transitory collection and the extreme view, we have a view that thinking that they are very good views and that they are very good ideas. So in other words, you've got a certain view that Buddha would suggest is mistaken, and then you think it's the best view. I mean, these are very precise attitudes in the mind, you know, and they're often kind of philosophically grounded. So you've got to kind of look at the meaning of them. The fourth one is holding wrong ethics and disciplines as supreme. This is always, they always talk about this. And then the Buddha, when he came along, he argued, for example, with some of the previous, Hindu yogis who believed that by starving yourself and by walking on fire and stabbing yourself with tridents, I don't remember all the details, that they were kind of good disciplines, whereas the Buddha would suggest that they were inappropriate. Things like that. Yeah, that's right. He talks about that. Then the fifth one is called wrong view. So this is wrong view is the name of the whole category, but the fifth one of this five, he calls it also. Then last but not least, we have wrong view. Wrong view refers to grasping at something that is existent as non-existent. So for example, grasping at karma as being non-existent, or grasping at the three jewels as being non-existent. So these are quite specifically Buddhist oriented, these views, you know, so you've got to think about them, look at them and analyze them. Okay, this is now the group of the 6 root afflictions, as they're typically called when you study Lorig. So it's worth reading to think about them. Now you've got another category he's got. Now he's got a new thing here. What's all this? Oh, I'm not going to go into that. Forget that. You can read it. It's okay. Antidotes. So this is a very common way, and I never talk this way either, and it's important. They're the opposite to these different, mistaken. So the opposite to attachment, for example, at the very basic level, you've got to apply the antidote to attachment. So one is thinking about impermanence. Another one that's really good, and when I first heard the Lamas talk about it, I just thought it was plain stupid. Like if you're attached to food, see it as caca, see it as shit and piss. And I thought, what a stupid idea that I wouldn't eat it. Well, that's the point, isn't it? So it's a really obvious antidote. If you just, because attachment is over, it sees the chocolate cake and it doesn't see any of the problems that chocolate cake causes. We know too much cake gives you diarrhea or constipation or gives you acid reflux. And when it comes out your body, I mean, they have all these analyses that I got so impatient with. I thought, what a stupid idea, but they're really logical. It's very helpful. I mean, if you're very attached, like Lama Zopa, and this wonderful teaching of Lama Zopa's in his book called, I always forget it. I have to get it and I'll show you the book. Hang on. Now I can't reach it. It's too high up and I can't get it. I'll have to try. Break my neck on the way. Here it is. Okay. This wonderful book that Rinpoche asked me to put together from all his letters to prisoners, okay? It's called Enjoy Life Liberated from the Inner Prison, then the outer prison won't become the real prison. And I really beg you to get this book. You can download, we produce it especially, you can buy it online. It raises money for the prison project, okay? You can go there right now to its own website. Enjoy Life Liberated from the Inner Prison. And there's an amazing chapter in here. All this is from prison letters to prisoners. You know, this is from one guy who got a letter from Rinpoche that was 45 pages, okay, typed. And there's in the whole of a chapter on emptiness and attachment in this book are from that letter to this fellow. And the chapter on attachment is incredible because this fellow talks about being attached to sex, you know. Of course, he's in prison. He can't get any sex from girls anyway. So Rinpoche talks in detail the typical way to do the analysis. If you're attached to a person's body, you start to analyze it. You know, you analyze what it really is. You go up close. You know, for example, one of the typical meditations they would say is the antidote to attachment to a body. You sort of peel away the skin. I mean, you'd be revolted to see a person with no skin. You'd be vomit. You'd sick. It would be totally repulsive to you. Or if you you know, or you took the contents of the person's body, looked at their heart and their lungs, you could not possibly find that delicious. You would not fall in love with that. We know it's true, but we just don't want to do it, you know, because we have this fantasy of this divine person with their skin and their beautiful smile, and their eyes, their organs. I mean, we love that. But this is a really logical analysis as an antidote to attachment if you're prepared to do the work, you know, and that's the point. So I really recommend this book. It's great, I tell you. Enjoy Life, Liberated from the Inner Prison. Go online, you can download, you get a digital version or you can have it posted to you. And all the profit goes to the prison project. So there's really logical, these approaches, but you've got to have the wish to do it, not just to buy into your attachment, you know, which is what we do. We obsess. I mean, you can't force, the thing is the thoughts, let's say the attachment to food is so enormous, or the attachment to sex, or the attachment to alcohol, or attachment to video games, whatever it might be. We know we've got those attachments, so you can't force it away. That's just not practical. But this is it's so logical is to see it from another point of view, to look at the downside, the negative consequences, or to look at the object itself in a different way. So it means you've got to be prepared to do that. You've got to want to do that, to argue with attachment's misconception, you know. You've got to have courage to do that. It's exactly the same with anger. I mean, an antidote to anger is very obvious, but it's very difficult to do. An antidote to anger it says to meditate on love and compassion and patience. Yeah, that sounds very nice. What does that mean? His Holiness says, you know, in general, when someone asked about how do you apply emptiness in daily life, and this is applying to everything. He said, you simply see things from another point of view. So the number of people I know who are Buddhist, who have changed their relationship completely with their mother. You know, we love to hate our mums. We know that. People hate their mothers, blame their mothers, they're attached, they're neurotic, they're possessive, and that's just very common in our culture. So the number of people I know including myself, have consciously, what you do is you paint a new picture of the person. Instead of, you see, what all the delusions do, they take several aspects of the object, like your mum, you remember the bad things she did, and then you paint the whole of the picture of your mum, seeing only those qualities. We know we do this. So what do? You paint a new picture of your mum. It's not difficult. You just have to want to do it. And before you know it, you're going to love your mum again. It's incredible. That's really the most direct, powerful antidote to anger. So, of course, even to anybody you hate, the politicians who you hate them. You see their ugly qualities. You see they're wicked. You see they lie. You see whatever they do, you know. All of those might be true, but you've got to see them in a different way, and you'll see them differently. I mean, that's what love means. Love is seeing good qualities and wanting a person to be happy. Compassion is seeing a person suffering and wanting them not to suffer. And it's your mind that does this. So we've got the ability. We just have to have the will to do it. This is the point, you know. Of course, as Fedor talks about here, you meditate on the disadvantages of anger. They're really evident, but we just don't like to think about them. It's so clear. Attachment's harder to see the disadvantages of. Anger is incredibly easy. He spends pages on this. So read his teachings, please. And then meditating on patience, that's amazing. You see, patience is a very specific quality. They really go into detail about it in the 6 perfections. You know, it's one of the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva. And patience is a very brave attitude. We think of patience, I think, as passive aggression, you know. You kind of put up with something. You see the ugly thing and you kind of grit your teeth, waiting for it to stop. That's not patience. That's better than vomiting it out, but that's aggression, passive aggression. It's kind of like suppressing, but angry in your mind still. Patience is a really brave attitude that takes time to cultivate. It means, you see, greeting the problem. You see, attachment is this fragile this poor little child inside us who can't stand problems. Attachment is this little junkie that only wants everything to be lovely. The millisecond attachment doesn't get the lovely thing, aversion arises. And this is the panic attack. Oh my God, that can't be possible. So when it's very strong, it's anger. When it's milder, it's kind of irritation, upset, annoyed. And if you build that up, it becomes kind of depression and despair. It's internalized aversion. So patience is the most direct antidote. You see, aversion pushes the obstacle away. You push the thing away. You don't want to look at it. You can't, or you think about it all the time. You can't stand it. Patience is greeting the problem, welcoming the problem. That's what it means, welcoming the problem. Of course, it implies you can see it differently as well. So it demands a lot of practice because we've got the instinct of attachment and the instinct of anger are very strong. So it takes time to greet the problem. And then, of course, on the Bodhisattva path, you literally reinterpret it. As Lama Zopa says, you learn to like problems like you like ice cream. This is a more advanced way when we've really got some stability with our practice, you know. But here, at least the patience they talk about is at least, this is a powerful one, at least don't say or don't follow through with the anger. You just sit there like a rock. You don't respond. So we think that's suppression. No, not at all, because we're becoming conscious. So you consciously decide you won't respond. That's the very first level of practice. You don't say the words. You don't take the object. You don't punch. You don't respond and harm. It's powerful practice. But the mind of patience is not something gooey. It's very powerful. It's a very intelligent mind. You greet the problem. You don't be afraid of it. Delusions are rooted in fear. This is what's fascinating. All delusions are in the character of fear. So anger is like a panic attack that can't be happening. Patience is saying it is happening. Look at it. It's a very powerful state of mind, I tell you. It needs some wisdom too. Not just idiocy. Patience, pretty incredible. So the antidote to pride is pretty obvious. Where's my tissue? Now I can't blow my nose. Excuse me, I have to hang on a second. So pride, it's obvious. There's a lovely, lovely saying in Tibetan. I love it. When you're a little bit arrogant, you just remind yourself of something you can't do. And when you're feeling a bit low self-esteem, you remind yourself of something you can do. I mean, it's so simple, you know. I know because I don't speak Tibetan, you know, I never learned Tibetan. And I feel always a bit guilty about it, you know, I'm so lazy. Even now, I've got this on my wall, a few feet from me, there's a beautiful mantra written in gold, and it's on Mani Padme Hung, or so they tell me. But all I've been looking at those letters since I became a Buddhist, 45 years, I still see it as a pretty picture. It's very amazing. So I feel kind of ashamed. And Lama Lundup, the abbot at Kopan, whenever I'd come, he'd always greet me and he'd always speak Tibetan to me. And I was always completely embarrassed because I knew he was just forcing me to see how silly I was not learning, you know. I was always so ashamed. So whenever I'm feeling a bit arrogant, I remind myself I can only speak Australian. I mean, all you Europeans, you know, you speak about 6 languages. You're amazing. I can speak Australian about the best I can do. I mean, we Anglo-Saxons, I think it's a bit like we're a bit arrogant, aren't we? The whole world speaks English, right? But you Swedes and Germans and Belgians, you speak English, French, German, Spanish. I mean, that's unbelievable. I really admire you. So when I got low self-esteem, I tell myself, I don't know what I can do. I don't know what I can do, but never mind, I'll think of something. So that's a good one. Antidote to pride. Antidote against ignorance. We've got to use some wisdom, isn't it, really? So then he talks about, this is very fascinating, this section. He talks about the sequence in which afflictions are generated, the kind of the step-by-step process, you know. So they talk in this framework here, the root delusion is known as the view of the transitory collection, which is specifically an ignorance that refers to the I. That's all. It's the same character of ignorance as Maripa, but it's one related to the I. That's there all the time, this primordial assumption of an I in the first place. So that's underneath everything. As underneath everything primordial, there all the time. It's the assumption of an I. So then on the basis of that, he goes on a lot about this, but we've talked about this a lot. Okay. No, never mind that. So basically, we've done this many times. You've got the root assumption of an I. On the basis of that, you then want, you know, it's in a sense of a separate I, which means it's not happy. So then attachment to get something to make the I happy is the next one. And then the others stem from that, roughly speaking. But there's another interesting state of mind that I never talk about. Here it is here. So this chapter 5. Listen, this is our last class, isn't it, Tara? God, I better hurry.
Yes.
One whole hour already. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
We're not going to finish everything, so never mind. You've got the course notes. I might just have to go through the 12 links of dependent arising. I have to go through those briefly. It's, yeah, we'll try and squeeze it in. Maybe we can do that. We'll see what happens. So anyway, this is how he talks. Chapter 5, the causes of the delusions. So they talk about 6 different things that have to come together. This is helpful to understand. So so first of all, the latent afflictions, the latent mental illnesses in your mind, obviously from having practiced in the past. I mean, any tendency you've got, when you first meet a piano and you feel attraction to piano playing and you play it very easily, because latent in your mind is the tendency from having done it before. It's hardly rocket science. We're talking here the mental illnesses. So the first cause, if you like, is the tendency in your mind, you know. The afflictions aren't always necessarily manifest. It's sort of basically subconscious, you know. So the second thing, that affliction will arise when you meet the object. So for example, if you've got a tendency to kill fish from your past life, that only arises when you meet the object called fishing, called the fish in the water. It triggers the memory, you know, so the object is really obvious. And that's why it's very clear, if you're attracted to alcohol, it's obvious that if you keep away from alcohol, your mind calms down a little bit. We know we need to do that. You keep away from the object. It's so obvious, you know. If a person makes you really angry, if you've got any intelligence, you keep away from them until you're really advanced. The object is pretty powerful. The third one is, they call it, this is interesting, I never discussed this one. This is called, we've got a mistaken conception. It's the thing that, part of the mind that arises that is, and I'll go into this. Then you've got very strong habit. This is pretty obvious. And then you've got this ability to get distracted easily. And then the other one is our speech and listening to wrong viewpoints. So there's 6 different things that all come together, enable to the delusions to rise easily. So the latent afflictions just means, you know, that we've got certain tendencies, but they're quiet until you meet the object. I said that one. The next one is mistaken conception. I never talk about this, and I wonder why. Frankly, it's like, okay. One important cause we should work with are the mistaken conceptions. The mistaken conception is the case the case of anger is the kind of thinking that focuses and exaggerates the negative aspects of the object of one's anger. Well, in my opinion, frankly, that's a function of anger itself. But they seem to identify another state of mind known as mistaken conception that then, which believes in the exaggeration of the ugly quality that then gives rise to the anger. So for me, in my mind, it seems to be it's the same, but they identify it as another state of mind. So you've got to read it to understand it. Familiarity with it is pretty obvious. If you're very familiar from past lives with killing, the second you meet fishing, you're going to fall in love with it, and nothing in the world will stop you from doing it because the familiarity is so strong. If you're an alcoholic, the familiarity is so strong. So it's obvious, you know, familiarity. And then distraction, what they mean by that is it's referring to misleading friends. I don't know, whatever. So maybe if you decide to give up being an alcoholic, one of your first things is you give up the object, but you clearly have got to remove yourself from your alcoholic friends. It's just not being mean about people. It's just common sense. It's pretty obvious. Speech or listening to things that will dissuade you. If you keep listening to people praise alcohol, you'll get confused, you know. They're the 6. Okay, that'll do for that one. Chapter 6. Oh, another, too many things to talk about. We've discussed karma. I've discussed a lot of this stuff in my own way, in different way, you know, blah, 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 endless going, trying death. He talks about death here. He's following the Lamb Rim outline. I didn't do that. I follow Rabina's outline. I'm so sorry. All the death business, why he's mentioning it here, I don't know. And now we've got contemplating the 12 dependent links of origination, they call it. The 12 links of dependent arising. Let's see if we can do a bit about that. I never talk about this much. I'm very sorry. Basically, it's the 12 steps that one goes through in the creating of lifetimes, you know. They're sometimes described in terms of 2 or 3 different lifetimes, but here, let's just analyze this. I'll just go through what he says, okay? But before we go on with that now, do you have any questions, people? Are you any questions? Do you have any questions, please?
Yes, Lorraine.
Good. Lorraine, talk to me.
Thank you. I'm going to try to narrow it down a little bit. I know we don't have a lot of time.
Sure.
So the more I work through these things, the more I've been able to reach that state of unattachment. But I've also, it's to the point where I feel like I'm floating kind of, and it's an unusual experience for me. So I feel like I'm almost trying to grasp at things to get my balance, and I'm trying to get between trying not to grasp at the old patterns in order to get my balance and then falling back into them, but still trying to keep my footing with the Dharma.
I understand. No, that's a good point. And I understand your point. It's a very good point. So we just have to be cautious. Just sounds like your words already, you're understanding the trouble. Often what can happen in pursuing a spiritual path, we can either, this is not, you know, other examples, we can get so excited, you can rush off into it, and everything else becomes horrible and vague, and the world seems really awful, and you look at everybody and they're all deluded, and the other extreme is you become so detached that, you know, oh, would you like a cup of tea, Rabina? Oh, no, thank you. Would you like sugar in it? Oh, I don't mind. You become almost like nihilistic. So we've got to just be watching our mind, because our mind tends to go to extremes. So you're doing the right thing, Lorraine. It's just watch yourself. Be easygoing. Don't be too fanatic. Just one step at a time to find your footing. Or to find your balance. Is exactly right.
I also had a doubt, and I'll try to be brief with this as well. I've always had this sense that other beings, other, you know, animals, other realms of, I don't know, I've always just felt like they were different kind of people. And there's, you know, from what I'm hearing, you know, I might be seeing this the wrong way, but I'm getting the sense that, you know, because they are considered lower beings that don't have access to the Dharma, do we really know that for sure? Maybe they have a different kind of perception. Maybe there's a Dharma that's available to them.
I do understand your point, darling. All I can do is give you the Buddhas to take on it. We have to look into it. It's just a whole particular model that, you know, there are trillions and trillions and trillions of sentient beings, mind possessors, Our minds all are not physical. Our minds are beginningless. Our minds are endless. We're not created by anybody. And then what determines what each one of us experiences and what determines the kind of body we have, the experiences we have, in other words, the realm we occupy. It's a mental realm, basically, of all these different beings. So you've got from the spectrum of beings within samsara, as Buddha calls it, meaning the common denominator between all of us is the presence of these delusions in the mind. That's what others is the cause of suffering. So if you've got any of these delusions to one degree or another, depending on how strong your habits are, past actions and so on and so forth, you could be born as a human. You could be born as a god who's in a state of enormous joy and bliss, but has still got the root delusion of an intrinsic belief in an I. You can have the worst kind of suffering due to harming and negativity and much anger, which is called a hell rebirth, which is a mental state of unbearable suffering. And you could be a spirit, which is in a state of unbearable attachment and suffering. So they're all different types of states of mind of delusions, as long as you're defined as a samsaric being. And according to that, different levels of physicality. You know, you could argue a spirit being, because, you know, in the Buddhist model, especially the Vajrayana model, the four elements is what the matter is made up of. So our bodies look at it like a bag of bones, the same as a lion's body. And each of our bodies is joined with certain states of mind. We've all got, this Buddhist model refers to all of them. So a lion, for example, if you look objectively, just using this model, she's got a body like we have. She's got a body. She's got hands, she's got eyes, she's got nose, she's got senses. She's involved in the sense object. She's therefore got masses of ego grasping, which is the root assumption of an I, 1 billion times more strong than we have. She's got masses of attachment to get what that I wants. And then obviously with a mummy lion, the method that she uses to get breakfast, you know, she doesn't go and eat the acorns. She goes and rips the guts out of buffaloes for breakfast due to her past negativity, due to her past tendency to be angry. And so she's got the hands that fit that. She's got claws. And then when she eats the buffalo for breakfast, ripping out its guts as the buffalo is screaming, because her ego grasping is so strong, because her attachment is so enormous, because her aggression is so violent, she's utterly unaware of the suffering of the buffalo screaming in agony as she brings her kids to eat the hot entrails for breakfast. So that indicates incredible aggression, incredible attachment, incredible suffering, incredible ignorance, 1 million times more strong than a human's, even though we're bad enough, because she can't access any of her love, empathy, wisdom, kindness, generosity, forgiveness. They're buried under the weeds of the tendency that is expressing itself as what's called a lion. So this is the analysis. So the fundamental assumption here is that all beings are the same. The model of the mind in Buddhism refers to all of them. So it's a question of which delusions, how strong, or once you're out of samsara, and when you've cut the root of believing in the intrinsic I, you've cut the attachment, cut the aversion, then you are a radiant, blissfully happy being. But the other point is this: when you're on the bodhisattva path, you can manifest as a lion, you can manifest as a dog, an ant, a cockroach, a hell being for the sake of others. So it's hard to know who is who. So from that level, yes, animals could be special beings, but we can't see because we're not clairvoyant. But animal in its nature is the predominance of ignorance and fear and confusion. I mean, look at how they live their lives, living in fear, living in panic, ripping each other's guts out. You can tell the lion for 4 million years that the buffalo doesn't like this, but she has not the ability to hear it. Even humans have got a strong tendency to kill, like say fishing, which looks so benign, because the habit is so strong, you literally cannot see the suffering of the fish. That's how delusions blind us. This is the Buddhist model. So just to think about it, darling. Buddha might be wrong.
Thank you. And I love that you used the lion as an example, because in my mind, it's kind of relating to Wittgenstein's lion, the whole ideology that what Wittgenstein said was that even if a lion could speak, we wouldn't be able to understand it because it's coming from such a completely different perspective. So,
but the Buddha would disagree. The Buddha would say it's the same perspective of us. The delusions are the same.
I see.
Buddha would say it's no, not the same. That's not true at all, not from the Buddha's point of view. The delusions are exactly the same as ours, but they're 1 billion times more strong because they're not mitigated by the virtues. So we would be, that's why in the Buddhist view, eventually it is possible to see the minds of others perfectly, because it's the same model of the mind. That's the Buddhism. You understand?
Yes, that clears things up quite a bit.
That's interesting, isn't it? I know. Thank you, Lorraine. So kind. Yes, people, talk to me. Any other questions?
Ariella?
Yes. Ariella, yes, darling.
Good evening, Verbena.
Okay.
Thank you. A
Yes.
question in regards of painting a new picture of that person / our mother. By not painting the bad, negative things, aren't we, what do you do with the hurt that you have, with the mistrust that you
Of
have?
course, yes.
How can we
That's-
just paint a beautiful picture and
Yes.
ignore all the rest?
No, the different jobs we're discussing. The first job is to deal with your own pain, your own hurt, your own understanding, your own fears, because indeed that person did harm you. There's no argument about that. We're not discussing that the person didn't do those bad things. They well might have done those bad things. So the first stages of practice is the wisdom wing, where you learn to understand karma, which explains to you your karmic connection with the mother or whoever it is, and explains to you why you got in that relationship in the first place, why they harmed you. The karmic one already is so powerful as part of our own personal process of dealing with our own pain and explaining why these things happened. Then you're dealing with your own hurt, your delusions, your attachment, your anger, your jealousy. That's the wisdom wing job first, darling. There's no discussion of painting any new picture of your mum yet. Only when you get to the compassion wing, actually, and now you know why it happened. Now you know that there's a karmic connection with that person. Now you know why they harmed you because of past karma. You understand your own delusions. You've healed a lot of that. And now you can afford to see your mother differently. And nevertheless, even though she did harm you, there are still some things she did that she still nourished you. She fed you. She tied your shoelaces. She wiped your bottom. There are things that she still did do, even if she's a psychopath. But we can't see those things until we've dealt with our own stuff first. It's one step at a time, Ariella. You with me, darling? We can't rush ahead. It's not ready for that. Compassion is much more marvelous because it's based on pure clearing up our own rubbish first. Do you understand, darling? Good point, Ariella. Really good point. Thank you, darling. Who else then? Let's talk about the 12 links. We've got not much time left. So the 12 links, I'll just read them out. It's this kind of this, you see this wheel, there's this picture that you always see in the tankas and things.
I'm sorry, I missed a question in the chat box.
Yeah, please.
Would you like to
Of
ask?
course.
Or I'll read. Okay. I read that rebirth happens due to craving at the time of our previous death to not wanting to separate from that body. When people commit suicide, there doesn't seem to be the attachment of not wanting to separate from the body and the fear grasping arising from that. So it could be assumed that in most cases, the person may die with aversion, attachment to not feeling pain and unpurified negative karma still. But why do they take rebirth if there is seemingly no attachment to separation from the body and the resultant fear grasping? And there's another full paragraph. And if they are a materialist, they may even die with feelings of relief and peace, that their suffering will be over soon and be attached to the idea of non-existence. Obviously very ignorant and delusional, but it seems it could trigger a more positive rebirth than someone who is less ignorant, but dies not on their own terms with a lot of pain and aversion, for example. And
Thank you very much. It's very helpful to hear that. Yes, I understand. Yes, indeed, attachment at the time of death. Have we done the module death? We have done it, haven't we?
yes,
Okay. So I think, first of all, I highly recommend that you get Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, How to Face Death Without Fear. He goes into detail about all of this so in depth, taking the Buddhist view, of course. But I think let's try to understand this attachment, this craving. So at the time of death, and this is very much the 12 links as well. At the time of death, first of all, throughout that life, everything we've said and done and thought has sowed seeds in our mind, dropped these seeds into our bank vault, if you like. So at the time of death, in order to get another human body, we need bucket loads, we need access to really strong, delicious, rich, intentional, virtuous karmic seeds of non-harming, in particular non-killing, and even in particular practiced in the context of living in vows of non-killing. It's one of those seeds that we can deduce was triggered at the time of our past death, not more than a few weeks before our mind found its way to our mummy's fallopian tube. Okay, so we can imagine the past death. We could have been an animal, we could have been a human. Very at the time the death process starts, and Lama Zopa describes this in detail in his book, and that usually is a couple of hours before you stop breathing, although it can be longer. But in general, that process is this gradual deconstruction of the various components. It's described in terms of 8 stages of deconstruction of this package called me. And each of the 8 stages, or certainly the first 4, several things cease at each of those 4 stages. So the very first stage, the earth element ceases and your body becomes very heavy. Your eye consciousness begins to cease. Your capacity to distinguish, what is it? Anyway, it goes into much detail about each of these. Gradually, you're deconstructing. And by the way, it's exactly the same as the process of going to sleep. Okay. So anyway, the second stage, your ears start to go, and then the distinction between friends, enemies, and strangers, all these different parts of your mental and physical components start to cease. And by the second or third stage, a very powerful, intense level of grasping, which is described in these 12 links of dependent arising, which I'm going to go briefly into. One is called, the 8th one is called craving, and the 9th one is called, oh, this is all different. What happened? Oh, this is a different order. So usually the 8th one is called craving, and then the 9th one is called grasping, which is a really extra powerful level. 5th and 6th, maybe. Never mind. This is what is triggered. And as Lama Zopa says, the main cause of that intense craving is indeed the craving that holds on to this person. Now, we can imagine, like your point was very good, if you've got the wish to kill yourself because suffering is so bad, all you're thinking of doing is not being this person. But this is the interesting point. Once you start, let's say you take the pill to kill yourself because you can't stand the pain or whatever it is, but this craving is so primordial, it is going to kick in still, nevertheless, because it's so intense within us, and that will bring tremendous suffering, because you are going to be leaving this body. So even if you wanted to kill yourself, this craving is so primordially deep, and it causes unbelievable suffering because it's attachment to this body, even though you've just killed yourself. And you're going through this process. So this is a terrible kind of conflict will be in the mind. You're grasping to stay on to this body because it's the most primordial attachment we have to the body. Even though we hate our bodies, even though we want to kill ourselves, this happens automatically at this point after you've started the death process, after you've taken the pill to kill yourself. So theoretically, yes, the pain is unbearable and you want to get rid of it, but this craving will kick in and there'll be like a terrible contradiction for your mind because now you can't stop the process. So this will bring tremendous fear. And then what happens? The next one is even more powerful craving called grasping. And that is what now triggers the karmic seed that will produce your next rebirth. And because the fear is so tremendous, it can only trigger a negative seed, and then you will have a vision of your future life in the hells or the spirits or the animal realm. It's a totally primordial process, way beyond intellect, way beyond control, until you're the highly realized being. So it would not be a cool thing to do, if that makes sense. Do you have any questions to me from that? It's totally primordial, from countless lives of dying and countless lives of living. These are like programmed in the depths of our being, and only when the highest yogis have gone beyond. So the very best that most of us can do, the craving's going to happen no matter who you are. So that's why, as Lama Zopa says in this book, that when a person needs you in this life, when they need you most is at the time of death, because this craving and grasping is going to happen no matter what. So at least if you've got your beloved helping you, you've got a Buddhist practice, you've got your spiritual practice, you're trying to come to terms with death, you're letting go of grasping, you're letting go of grasping at permanence, you're welcoming the death, you know you're going to die, you're looking forward to your next good rebirth, your mind's more content, you've got your friends supporting you, holding your hand, literally, metaphorically. And then when the death process starts and you're hearing the mantras, your mind becomes relaxed. And when the grasping arises, then your mind still, this grasping is what triggers the seed that will determine your next rebirth. And because you've been practicing and thinking of the Buddha or thinking of Jesus, whoever it is you love, and your mind is more calm, you'll be able to navigate that grasping, and that grasping will trigger a positive seed, which is what would have happened for us in our past life, and our mind was already programmed to get a human mummy. And that's how come we got our human mummy. And this process all happens before you even stop breathing. So this is why it's so powerful to have people to support us and help us through this process. But to be wanting to die because you can't bear the pain is aversion. You plan your death, and then this grasping and craving kicks in, and it's much more powerful suffering because it's contradicting everything you thought would happen, and it's primordial. It's beyond conceptual. So it's likely to bring a suffering rebirth, more than likely, because the mind is just overwhelmed by fear, and that'll trigger the negative karmic seed. That's the analysis in Buddhism. I hope that helps. For a bit of food for thought.
They wrote, thank you.
Okay, good. So now these 12 links is a different order here. I was a bit confused by this. I don't know why he's got this order. He must have a reason. He's a better scholar than me. So I'll just read what he says. There's a different order they put these 12 links in. I'm just reading what he does here, okay? So now, okay, then after talking about death, we did this another time. The 12 links here, this is in a kind of an intellectual order of how they arise from the time, anyway, each time. One is called ignorance, which is the root ignorance. One is called karmic formation, which is a karmic seed that's left on your consciousness, which is the third one. Then on the basis of the karmic seed dropping a seed into your consciousness, there is then craving arising, and then grasping, and then they call the next one becoming. This is chapter 7. Then it's called name and form, then the 6 sources, then contact, feeling, birth, aging, and death. I'll just read through what he says. There's different ways of presenting all this, and I've never, ever given a teaching on it. I'm very lazy, so I must learn it properly so I can in the future. So you see the very first link is the link of ignorance. This ignorance particularly refers to the innate ignorance, grasping at the self as having an inherent nature. Then on the basis of that, this karmic formation, the next second one, particularly refers to the main karmic seed, which they call the throwing karma, which is the particular seed that you plant in your mind on the basis of doing what they call a complete action. So if there's a karmic seed of a complete action of non-killing, you have to have the object that is there, like the rat. You have the intention not to kill. Your motivation is compassionate. You consciously don't kill, and the rat stays alive. That's a complete action of non-killing. That'll drop a karmic seed in your bank vault that becomes a throwing karma that, in our case, getting a human body would have been one of the seeds that was triggered at the time of our death that programmed us to get a human body. Then we have the third link of consciousness. This is where the seed is planted on the consciousness, in the field of your consciousness. I won't go into details here about all these, just brief. Now, so of course, over the course of our life, there are many, many sets of 12 links interacting with each other. They're not all just in one set. The way it is outlined in the Lamrim is 2 sets of 12 links interacting with each other. So I'm now doing it in the sequence, which is outlined in the texts on the 12 links in Sarah Monastery. So it does actually mention that in Liberation, never mind, there's too many things here for our 10 minutes left. So read it. He's very helpful. His teachings are so helpful. So craving, the next one to come. So this is where now what happens is, as Lama Zopa describes it in his book, this is where how it links into the death. I'm sorry, if you're writing notes, it's going to be very confusing. So I suggest you don't write notes because I'm too wacky and leaping from point to point. Just read Venerable Fedor's chapter, please. It's chapter 7, okay? It's extremely helpful. There's no time to do it properly. And I don't want to confuse you. I'm sorry, so stop writing notes. You'll make a mess. So what he's talking about here is like with death, as Lama Zopa talks about it, I'm going to read from Lama Zopa. It's very helpful. Let me get Rinpoche's book. Okay, just briefly, I think there's something here. What happens at death? There's just some course notes here. 17. Okay. So death occurs. 5 aggregates. No, that's no good. Channels. No. Death, intermediate state. Where's the chapter? Here we go. This is from Lama Zopa's book, actually. It's particularly in relation to the links in relation to death, which is sort of helpful. Federal gives you much more detail about different things. So cyclic existence operates, Rinpoche says, through the 12 links of dependent arising. It's a different order here, okay? The first is from the ignorance that believes in intrinsic existence, we create 2 karma, the imprints of which are left on our consciousness, number 3. So then number 4, this produces, they call it name and form. So name refers to the 4 mental parts, the different mental aggregates, and then form is to the physical body, the egg and the sperm, when the 5 come together in the womb. So when they begin, so in other words, a delusion, because of root delusion, you do an action that leaves a karmic seed of throwing karma on your mind, and then that produces a type of rebirth, a name and form. So when they begin to develop it as the fetus, now once you're in the womb, they're known as the 6 sense bases. So this is the number 5 one, the 6 sense bases that you grow in the womb. The next is you have called contact, when the mind connects with the external objects through the sense bases of the eyes and the ears and so forth. Then that triggers a feeling, either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then that produces craving, number 8, and then that produces grasping, number 9, and that produces becoming, number 10, and then 11 is birth, and birth is said to be the first moment of conception in your mummy's womb. And then the second moment of conception after conception in your mother's womb, that's the beginning of the 12th link called old age and death. So old age starts the second after the first moment of conception in your mother's womb. Okay, very disappointing. That's the 12 links in relation to death. I can't get over that. It's so hilarious. As Lama Zopa says, old age starts the second moment in your mother's womb, and then from there on, the only thing to look forward to is death. You're not even born yet. So it's a very sobering analysis, all right? So the 12 links of this precious human rebirth. So let us discuss the 12 links in relation to this human body that we have now. What caused our consciousness to join the egg and sperm in our mother's body? So in past lives, because of ignorance, we created both non-virtuous and virtuous karma, which planted seeds or left potentials in the field of our consciousness. At the time of death of our life before this one, whether we are human or an elephant or a kangaroo, at the time of death in the life before this one, during the death process, right? Craving arose, craving to not separate from that body. And that's what I'm saying. Even if you decide to kill yourself because you have such aversion to the pain, this craving, once the death process starts, will kick in tremendously. And that will be the terrible suffering, because even though you've decided to kill yourself, you're grasping on the body still. So now, then fear arises because of attachment to not wanting to leave the body. That's what causes fear at the time of death. After that, grasping arises, a stronger form of attachment. And in this case, and this is what's fascinating here, in this time, in our case, attachment to receiving a human rebirth. This grasping, we've actually learned, we need to learn to utilize this in a good way. Lama Zopa says this in a minute, you'll hear it. So now, in the case of someone who's going to be reborn in the hot hells, for example, the craving is the same, not wanting to separate from their body, but the grasping is to heat because they feel very cold. Many times dying people say they feel cold and beg for blankets, but even if you give them 2 or 3, it won't be enough. Their grasping at heat is so strong. And this also could happen, of course, because the fire element is ceasing at that time. So the grasping at heat activates a negative karmic seed, the second link, which causes their mind to migrate to a hell being's body right after death. The grasping is the very close condition. There were, of course, the previously created causes. The first link, ignorance, and the second, karma. So at the time of death, this grasping triggers the karmic seed, number 2, the one that is then going to be negative or positive based upon what you're grasping at. That'll determine your future life. So if you're dying with intense grasping, let's say, that Moshe's example, to heat, that can trigger a negative karmic seed and you'll be born in the lower realms. But if you're grasping, even at, even you've, let's say you're a good Christian and you're thinking about one of the ways of helping dying people, like you're helping your mummy who loves God, you talk about God to her. You help her get used to the idea of God. Instead of holding on to this birth, she can look forward to heaven. This is a very skillful means. So you can utilize attachment to think of something useful. So then she can relax and let go of this rebirth and look forward to a new rebirth. Now, you could argue a person who kills themselves could do that, but it would be an unusual situation because what motivated to kill themselves was aversion to the pain and to all the despair and the depression in their mind, So if you're grasping at going to heaven, grasping at a future rebirth, that can help you. That's skillful means, It's very interesting. So in our case as humans, a very close condition at the time of our past death, just before the gross consciousness ceased, which is when you stop breathing, was the grasping at, the wish to receive a human body. Now, this is me speculating, but listen to this. Instead of just going and killing your little dog or your little cat, which is what we do these days when they're sick, we call it euthanasia. We call it putting them to sleep. How about thinking like this? Your dog is so attached to you, right? Your doggy absolutely adores everything about you. So there you are helping your doggy die. She's sick, she's old, you love her, you take care of her. She trusts you completely. So even though she's in pain, she's got trust in you. You play mantras, which helps her mind become peaceful. It attracts the Buddhas to be there. She loves you. She thinks about you. You are in her mind. I would not be surprised that when she's dying, her memory of you and her mind as a human can help trigger a karmic seed that will give her a human birth, because of the image of her mind. And of course, if she's listening to mantras as well, the Buddhas will hook her and help her mind, There's more ways to think about it than just thinking you got to kill your dog, So when we understand that attachment to this life, this is the point, holding on to this life is not virtuous. Why not? Because you can't hold on to it. The more you hold on to something you can't hold on to because it is disintegrating, the more nightmare for your mind. Think about this. It's not a moralistic issue. We can't hold on to this life because its nature is it is disintegrating. So to hold on to something that's already disintegrating in front of you is a nightmare for your poor mind. But to look forward, which is one of the functions of attachment, to a lovely future human rebirth, to the Pure Lands, or if you're a Christian, to heaven, that can relax your mind and it can help you get there. It's very skillful, very interesting point. But attachment at the time of death to either a human life or rebirth in a Pure Land is virtuous because the object is virtuous. Then we can understand the function of this link of grasping at the time of death. I find that very fascinating to think about. So in other words, a summary of these 12 links from this perspective of death. Venerable Fedor's is from another perspective, so it's good you study it. To summarize, 5 of the links are causes from past lives. 3 delusions, the 3 links of ignorance, craving and grasping, and then 2 karmas, the 2 links of compounded action, which is karma, and becoming. This becoming one is a very peculiar one. Rinpoche tells us in a second. That's the 10th link. So first there was the delusion, ignorance, the first link. Then the delusions arising at the time of death, the 8th link, craving, and the 9th link, grasping. The order that Fedor puts them in is different, so don't be confused. There's different ways you can do it in the first part. Then three were the two, then there were the two karmas. The second link, in our case, a virtuous karma, which could have been created thousands, even millions of lives ago. And the second karma, becoming, they call it, the 10th link. And this is what Rinpoche calls it. The previously created karmic seed made ready by craving and grasping at death. That is what is called becoming. So it is these five that formed these aggregates, this body and mind, this samsara. Of the 7 results that manifest in this life, the 11th link, birth, started at the moment our consciousness joined the fertilized egg. Old age, the beginning of the 12th, old age and death, started the next moment in the womb. Old age is not just what is known in the world, the wrinkles, the white hair, and so forth. Now, all there is left is death. Okay, that'll do for the 12 links. But you have to study Venerable Fedor's teachings. Okay, so we're done. All right, people, best of my ability, sorry, rave on. But in the point of view of the path now, we want to get renunciation. We want to be so disgusted by suffering, the future suffering of the lower realms, the future suffering of all the bad experiences, the future suffering of all the ridiculous delusions. We are happy to want to give up suffering and its causes. So let's imagine we've accomplished renunciation and we are blissful and content and very happy. And then we'll die with bodhicitta and happily take another rebirth. And then we can practice the compassion wing. Okay, that's where we're at. All right, darlings. Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Ma Kye Panan, Kye Guchi, Kye Panyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gondu, Pavashog, Gewadi, Nudu Dag, Lama Sange, Drubgyone, Droa, Chikyang, Malupa, Dei Sala, Gurpa Shog. And may we never, never, ever, ever develop a wrong view towards the deeds of our most precious teachers, our most precious spiritual mentors, our most precious gurus or lamas, whichever language you speak. With faith and respect, gained from seeing their goodness, may their full inspiration, may all their knowledge flow into our hearts so we can become just like them. Okay. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, people at the center. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody. Much love all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Bina.
That's it, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much love.